He almost did not stop. His driver had instructions and the road was clear, and Frederick was not a man who interrupted his own schedule for strangers. But something made him look through the carriage window at exactly the wrong moment. Or perhaps the right one. A woman's wrist, a needle, and a mark being pressed permanently into her skin while the woman who ordered it watched with the expression of someone crossing an item off a list. He knocked on the roof of the carriage. The driver pulled the horses to a stop. Frederick sat for one moment, looking through the window at the open courtyard gate and at what was happening inside it. Then he opened the carriage door and stepped down into the October Road and walked through the gate and into the courtyard of Ashworth Manor, as though he had always intended to be there. The tattooist looked up first. He was a man of 50 with ink-stained hands and the particular expression of someone performing a service they have been paid to perform without commentary. He registered Frederick's coat, his bearing, the quality of his boots, and he stopped working. Lady Vivienne turned second. She was dressed in deep burgundy silk with her dark hair arranged with the precision of a woman who understands that appearance is authority. Her expression moved from composed satisfaction to composed courtesy in the time it took her to identify a duke, which was approximately 2 seconds, because Lady Vivienne had spent her entire adult life learning to identify the people whose recognition mattered. "Your Grace," she said. "What an unexpected pleasure." Frederick did not look at her. He was looking at Diana. She was seated on a wooden stool with her left arm resting on a low table. Her wrist turned upward, her sleeve pushed back to the elbow. The mark was small, a symbol pressed into the inside of her wrist in dark ink. Not yet finished. The skin around it reddened. She had turned her face away from the gate when she heard the carriage stop. She turned it back now, slowly, and looked at Frederick with the particular expression of someone who has been looked at as a problem for so long that they have forgotten what it feels like to be looked at as a person. She did not ask for help. She did not say anything at all. She simply looked at him with those direct, dark eyes and waited to find out what kind of man he was. Frederick looked at the mark. He looked at what it meant. He understood perfectly what it meant. He was a man who understood the systems he lived inside, and he understood that what was being pressed into this woman's wrist in a courtyard in October 1880 was not simply ink. It was every door in polite society closing simultaneously. It was the end of the possibility of marriage, of respectable employment, of entering a room without the verdict preceding her. It was a life sentence delivered in a single sitting by a woman in burgundy silk who was currently looking at him with an expression of practiced warmth. He looked at it for 4 seconds. Then he looked at Lady Vivienne. "I would like to see the estate records," he said. "The full archive. Everything from Sir Robert's time." Lady Vivienne's smile did not change. "Of course, Your Grace," she said. "I would be delighted. Before we go any further, I want to stop and ask you something directly. How are you feeling right now? Because if Frederick stepping through that gate has already done something to you that you cannot quite name, then you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Thank you for being here. Please hit the subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. Every single one of those actions reaches back to us and matters more than you know. Now let us go back to Diana. Because Frederick has seen the mark, but he does not yet know the full story of how it got there. And the full story is considerably worse than what he witnessed in that courtyard. Diana Ashworth had been her father's daughter in every way that mattered. Sir Robert Ashworth had been a man of genuine warmth and genuine intelligence, and the particular combination of the two that produces people who are very good at understanding ideas and considerably less good at understanding other people's capacity for calculation. He had loved Diana's mother with the complete and uncomplicated devotion of someone who does not know how to love partially. When her mother died, Diana was 11, a fever, quick. Sir Robert had been undone in the particular way that genuinely loving people are undone by loss, which is to say completely and for a long time. He had met Lady Vivienne at a county dinner 3 years after Diana's mother died. She had been presented to him by a mutual acquaintance as a widow of good family and quiet circumstance, and she had conducted herself at that dinner and at every subsequent occasion with the careful grace of a woman who understood that the impression she made in the first 6 months would determine everything that followed. Sir Robert had seen warmth. He had seen kindness toward Diana, who was 14 and watchful, and not easily fooled, but who had been lonely enough and young enough to want to believe that the warmth was real. It was not real. Diana understood this by the time she was 16. She said nothing about it because she was not yet sure what saying something would accomplish, and because her father was happy in the way that people are happy when they have decided to be happy, and she did not know how to take that from him without taking something that could not be replaced. Lady Vivienne arrived with one daughter, Cecily, who was Diana's age and who had been shaped by her mother into a performance of pleasantness that was technically flawless and entirely hollow. Cecily was not cruel by nature. She was simply a person whose nature had been so thoroughly managed by someone else that she had very little access to it and had learned not to look for it too hard because looking for it was uncomfortable and her mother discouraged. Discomfort. Sir Robert's will had been written with the careful intention of a man who loved his daughter and understood that love required specificity to survive his absence. The estate and its inheritance were designated to Diana in full, contingent on her continued residence at Ashworth Manor and her maintained good standing in the county. He had inserted the good standing provision because he had wanted to ensure Diana remained connected to the community he had spent his life in. It had not occurred to him that good standing was a thing that could be manufactured and destroyed by someone with sufficient patience and sufficient motive. Lady Vivienne read the will at the solicitor's office with an expression of appropriate grief and took the good standing provision home and examined it from every available angle for 3 weeks before she identified the mechanism she intended to use. The brooch had belonged to Sir Robert's mother. It was the most valuable single item in the estate jewellery, a piece of considerable age and considerable worth, set with a specific stone in a specific arrangement that the estate inventory described in precise detail. Lady Vivienne had sold it 6 months before Sir Robert died to a London jeweller for £340, telling Sir Robert she had sent it for cleaning. Sir Robert had not noticed its absence because he was not a man who examined his own possessions with forensic attention. Lady Vivienne had kept the £340 in a separate account. She had acquired a replacement brooch similar in appearance, different in the 3 specific details the estate inventory recorded, and placed it in the display cabinet. When the time came, she reported the replacement brooch missing. The constable searched. The replacement brooch was found in Diana's room, in a box beneath her bed. Diana said she had never seen it before. The constable looked at Lady Vivienne's expression of maternal devastation and at the physical evidence in his hands and made his determination. Diana stood in the parlour and listened to the determination and said nothing, because there was nothing available to say that would change what the constable was holding and what Lady Vivienne's expression was performing. She looked at her stepmother once directly, without flinching, and Lady Vivienne looked back with the composed and slightly sorrowful expression of a woman who has done what was necessary and has made her peace with it. The tattoo was Lady Vivienne's elaboration. Not required, chosen. The most permanent available option, selected with the deliberateness of someone who has decided that temporary measures are insufficient and that what she wants is something Diana will carry into every room for the rest of her life. Diana had been told the evening before. She had sat at her embroidery frame in the East Wing room she had been moved to 6 months earlier, and she had looked at the piece she was working on, a botanical study of the roses in the East Garden. The finest thing she had made. The silk threads catching the evening light in the particular way that made the roses look as though they were still growing, and she had made herself a promise. Whatever happened to her wrist the following morning, her hands would not stop. Lady Vivienne could put a mark on her skin. She could not put one on the work. She had gone to the stool in the courtyard the following morning, and she had sat down, and she had turned her face away from the gate, and she had endured it in silence, because silence was the one form of resistance available to her that Lady Vivienne could not take. She had not expected the carriage to stop. She had not expected a duke to walk through the gate and look at her wrist, and then look at her face, and then ask for the estate records in the tone of a man who has already decided what he intends to find. Frederick returned the following morning with his solicitor, a precise and thorough man named Aldous, who carried a leather satchel that he filled methodically over the course of 2 days with everything the Ashworth estate archive contained. Lady Vivienne provided access with the composed cooperativeness of a woman who has curated her records carefully and believes she has nothing to fear from their examination. She had not curated carefully enough. The estate jewellery inventory taken at Sir Robert's death was a document of considerable detail, the kind of detail that a thorough man produces when he understands that detail is the primary defence against future dispute. It described the brooch in 3 specific particulars that the replacement brooch did not share. The stone was different. The setting weight was different. The hallmark date was different by 11 years. The original brooch appeared 4 pages later in a separate document, a sale record, dated 8 months before Sir Robert's death, signed by Lady Vivienne, addressed to a London jeweller named Hartley on Bond Street, for the sum of £340. The account into which the £340 had been deposited was not the estate account. It was an account in Lady Vivienne's name at a separate London bank. Aldous set down his pen and looked at Frederick across the library table. "It is sufficient," he said. "I know," Frederick said. "Find me Caldwell." Magistrate Caldwell was a man of 60 who had administered justice in this county for 30 years, with the patient and slightly weary competence of someone who has seen most of what people do to each other and has concluded that thoroughness is the only reliable response to human ingenuity in the service of dishonesty. He received Frederick and Aldous on a Thursday morning and read the report with the careful attention it deserved. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at Frederick with the expression of a man who has just been shown that a determination made under his jurisdiction was made on fabricated evidence and who is experiencing the particular combination of anger and professional obligation that this discovery produces. "I will need 3 days," he said. "Take them," Frederick said. In those 3 days, Diana continued to embroider. Lady Vivienne had removed her frame, citing the need for the East Wing furniture. Diana had stretched her current piece across a flat board she found in the storage room and continued working. Lady Vivienne had removed her access to silk thread, citing household economy. Diana had found cotton and wool in the mending basket and continued working with what she had, because the alternative was stopping, and stopping was not available to her as an option. Frederick visited twice during those 3 days. Both visits were formally correct. He spoke to Lady Vivienne with the composed courtesy of a man conducting routine inquiries. He spoke to the household staff with questions that were precise and brief. He spoke to Diana once in the garden, in the presence of the senior housemaid, for 11 minutes. And he asked her about the East Garden roses, because the estate records had mentioned a particular variety her father had cultivated, and he wished to understand whether they were still maintained. Diana told him about the roses, with the direct and detailed knowledge of someone who has tended them personally and knows their names and their habits, and the specific quality of light they required in the early morning to show their best color. She spoke without performance, and without the particular social anxiety of someone trying to make a good impression, and Frederick listened with the complete attention of a man who is not only listening to what is being said, but to the specific quality of the person saying it. When she finished, he thanked her and said he hoped the roses would continue to be well tended. She looked at him for a moment. "They will be," she said. "They are mine." It was the first time she had said anything that acknowledged what was at stake and what she intended to do about it. Frederick walked back to the house and spent the evening reviewing Aldous' final report with the particular focused attention of a man who intends to make sure nothing has been missed, because what happens next will happen in public, and in public there is no correcting an error after the fact. The County Assembly met on the 2nd Friday of October in the assembly rooms of the nearest market town, a formal quarterly gathering of the county's principal families that served as the primary social institution of the principal region and as its primary mechanism for the distribution of reputation, which in 1880 England amounted to the same thing. Lady Vivienne attended in deep burgundy silk. She sat in the 3rd row with Cecily beside her, and her expression arranged in the composed and slightly distant manner she wore to public occasions present, appropriate, giving nothing away. Frederick rose at the end of the formal proceedings. He did not call for silence. He did not need to. When the Duke of Ashworth rose at a county assembly, the room adjusted itself without being asked. He spoke for 12 minutes. He presented the inventory discrepancy. He presented the sale record. He presented Aldous' written analysis. He presented Magistrate Caldwell's formal finding delivered that morning. Signed, witnessed, irrevocable. That the theft accusation against Miss Diana Ashworth was unsupported by the available evidence and was formally withdrawn. He presented the finding of estate fraud against Lady Vivienne Ashworth. He presented the revocation of Lady Vivienne's guardianship of the Ashworth estate. He presented all of this in the precise and unhurried voice of a man who has built something that will hold weight and is delivering it to the people who need to hear it. He did not look at Lady Vivienne while he spoke. Every other person in the room looked at nothing else. Lady Vivienne sat with her spine straight and her hands folded and her expression composed through the first 4 minutes. Through the 5th minute, something happened beneath the composure that she was not entirely able to manage, not collapse. She was constituted against collapse, but a fracture, the kind that does not show on the surface, but that changes what the surface is resting on permanently. By the 6th minute, she was holding her composure the way a person holds something very heavy that they cannot put down, because putting it down would mean acknowledging they could no longer carry it. Cecily sat beside her and looked at the floor. The assembly room was very quiet when Frederick finished. Then it was not quiet at all. Diana was in the east garden when Frederick's carriage came up the drive that evening. She was checking the roses, the late October ones, the last of the season, the ones that stayed longest if the weather allowed. She heard the carriage and did not turn immediately because she had learned over the preceding weeks to wait for information rather than reach for it. She heard his footsteps on the gravel path. She turned. He looked at her in the fading October light, and she looked at him, and he told her everything, not a summary, the full account, in the precise and complete way he told things, because she was a person who dealt in full accounts. And he had understood this from the first conversation in the garden about roses. She listened to all of it, without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She looked at her left wrist at the mark, visible below the pushed-back sleeve, the skin around it fully healed now, the ink permanent and dark against her pale skin. "It does not come off," she said. It was not a complaint. It was a statement of fact, delivered in the way she delivered all facts directly, without embellishment, without the expectation that anyone would do anything about it. "No," Frederick said. She looked at him. "I did not think you could fix that part." "I cannot," he said. "I am sorry for it." She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "You fixed the part that could be fixed. That is what was available to you. That is what you did with it." He looked at her, with the grey eyes that had been looking at her with increasing frequency and decreasing pretense over the preceding weeks. "Miss Ashworth," he said. She waited. "I would like to continue visiting Ashworth Manor," he said. "Not on estate business." He paused. "On my own account." She looked at him for a long moment, with the direct and unperformed attention she gave to everything that mattered. She was thinking about the estate records, and the 12 minutes at the county assembly, and the conversation about roses, and the specific quality of his listening, which was the kind of listening that did not perform itself, but simply was, completely and without reservation. "Yes," she said. "I think that would be acceptable." He looked at something that was not quite a smile on her face. It was the particular expression of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been given permission to set a small part of it down. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked back toward the house, through the late October garden, where the last roses were holding on with the particular stubborn beauty of things that refuse to be finished before they are ready, and the evening light came through the elms in long amber lines across the path. And Diana Ashworth walked through her own garden on the arm of a man who had read the records himself, and the mark on her wrist caught the last of the light, and she did not look at it, and she did not hide it, and it was simply part of her, and she was simply herself, and that, in the end, was everything. The embroidery workshop opened in the east wing of Ashworth Manor in the spring of 1881. 6 women from the village. Diana's training, Diana's management, Diana's name, her actual name, not the anonymous designation under which her work had been selling in London for 3 years. The London shops received the first formally attributed pieces in April. Mr. Hartley On Bond Street, the same Mr. Hartley who had purchased Sir Robert's brooch from Lady Vivienne for £340, and who had, when presented with Aldous' inquiry, produced the sale record with the cooperative promptness of a man with nothing to hide, wrote to express his particular pleasure at finally knowing whose work he had been selling, and his hope that the formal attribution would continue. Diana wrote back confirming that it would. Frederick visited Ashworth Manor with the frequency and informality of a man who has stopped pretending he has another reason to be there. He commissioned the botanical study of his own estate gardens. Diana visited to study the gardens. She stayed 4 days longer than the gardens required. Nobody commented on this, because the county had reached its own conclusions and found them entirely satisfactory. They were married in May in the parish church, where Sir Robert Ashworth had been married 30 years earlier, and where his name was still spoken with the warm regard of a community that had not forgotten what genuine goodness looked like. The church was full. The village was represented entirely. Mr. Aldous attended and sat in the second row with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has done his work correctly and is watching its correct conclusion. Magistrate Caldwell attended and shook Frederick's hand afterward with both of his own, in the manner of a man expressing something that professional dignity prevents him from saying directly. Diana wore ivory. She did not wear gloves. The mark on her wrist was visible throughout the ceremony, during the vows, during the signing of the register, during the walk back down the aisle through the full church. She had considered covering it, and had decided against covering it, in the same way she decided most things, by examining the available options, identifying what each one cost, and choosing the one whose cost she could live with most honestly. Covering it cost her something she was not willing to pay. Showing it cost nothing except the comfort of people who had not earned the right to her comfort. Frederick held her marked wrist during the vows. Not the other hand. The marked one. Deliberately and without announcement. The way he did most things completely, and with the full weight of his attention, and without any intention of doing otherwise. She looked at him when she felt his hand close around her wrist, and his expression was the expression of a man who has been paying attention since a Thursday morning in October, when he looked through a carriage window and saw something we could not look away from, and who intends to keep paying attention for the remainder of the available time. The vicar spoke the words. The church was very still. Outside, the May morning was warm and generous, and the roses in the churchyard were the first of the season and entirely indifferent to their own beauty. Lady Vivienne's fraud proceedings concluded in the autumn of 1881 with a judgment that required full financial restitution to the Ashworth estate and the permanent revocation of her social standing in the county. She left for London, where she was not known, and where the absence of knowledge about her could be managed for a time. Cecily wrote Diana a letter from Edinburgh that was careful and not quite an apology, but was the most honest thing she had written in years. Diana kept it. She did not reply for 6 weeks. When she did reply, it was 2 sentences, brief, direct, and entirely without warmth or coldness, simply accurate. Cecily wrote back. They corresponded occasionally after that in the careful way of 2 people who share a complicated history and have decided that occasional honest correspondence is preferable to permanent silence. The mark remained on Diana's wrist for the rest of her life. She stopped noticing it within a year. Not because it faded, it did not fade, but because the things she was doing with her hands were so much more present than anything that had been done to them, that the mark became simply part of the landscape of her own skin, like a scar from a childhood fall. Evidence of something survived, rather than something defining. The workshop grew. By 1885, it employed 14 women. By 1890, it had a formal name, the Ashworth Embroidery, and a reputation in London textile circles that had nothing to do with Diana's title and everything to do with the quality of the work. Frederick provided whatever resources were needed, and described himself when asked about his involvement as the least qualified person in the building, which was accurate, and which Diana confirmed without hesitation when the subject arose, which he found genuinely amusing. They were good years, honest years, years built from the particular material that is only available to people who have chosen each other, with full information about what the choosing costs. Frederick kept the estate records in a locked drawer in his library, not as a wound, as a reminder of what careful reading of available evidence could accomplish when a person was willing to do the work. He had learned this from a woman seated on a wooden stool in a courtyard in October, who had not asked for help and had not performed her suffering for an audience, and had simply endured with her face turned away and her jaw set and her hands waiting for the moment when they could go back to making things. He had read the records himself. It turned out that was all it took. Thank you so much for staying to the very end. If this story moved something in you, if Diana's hands on that embroidery frame stayed with you, if Frederick's grip on her marked wrist meant something, then please do one thing right now. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you have not yet. Leave a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Until next time, read the records yourself. The truth is always in there if you are willing to look.